And for this first discussion, I'm delighted to have Jennifer Carpenter join me today. Jennifer is the CEO and president of the American the American Waterways Operators, and the president of the American Maritime Partnership. Jennifer and I have known each other for many years, and I've come to really appreciate Jennifer's expertise, her ability to articulate issues, so I'm delighted to have her sort of kick off this, what may be a series of discussions about maritime issues, particularly as they relate to our geopolitical situation. So welcome, Jennifer. It's great to have you here.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
Good. So let me just sort of do a little bit of a scene setting here in terms of where we are as an industry. You've been involved with the industry not nearly as long as I have, but for a few years. I remember first meeting you or seeing you on stage at the Propeller Club event in Buffalo in 1990 something. In February. It was kind of, it was chilly then, I remember, but I remember being very impressed with your discussion at the time of the Jones Act. And we have both seen many issues over the years sort of come and gone, from the Oil Pollution Act of 1990, decarbonization, sort of endless attacks on the Jones Act, offshore wind, and so on. All very important issues that got the attention that they were given. But when we think about today's issue, the geopolitical challenges that we have, and strategic decisions by China to build up their maritime industry, it seems to me like we are in a whole different place in terms of the significance of the environment we're in today. What are your thoughts about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I really think, Mike, that the maritime industry in the U.S. has never been more relevant, certainly in the course of my career, to the challenges and the opportunities that our country faces. Yeah. It really is qualitatively different, because we're not just talking about, how do we do things differently or better to improve some aspect of this industry: technology, safety, environmental stewardship. We're really talking about, why do we need a maritime industry, and what does it do for the country? And that's huge.
Yeah, we often would talk about the national security benefits of the American shipping and shipbuilding industry, and how important that is. In many respects, it was a hypothetical issue for a long time until we now have a real live national security threat in China and the geopolitical situation we have there. Do you think the industry gets it? Do you think the industry really understands that we are in a different era now?
I think recognition is growing, is how I will say that. And I agree with you completely that things that we've been talking about, part of my day job is to be an advocate for the Jones Act, and I know we'll talk more about that. But sometimes, as we have talked about the national security, the homeland security, the economic security value of this industry, I think there are a lot of people who saw that as kind of hypothetical, in the event of. And what we now see is just a qualitatively different situation. And I will say this, China gets it. There's no question that China gets it and understands that maritime is a fundamental component of, instrument of national security and national power. And I think in the US, we have been a little bit later to that realization, or perhaps it's been somewhere in the recesses of our mind, and now we are recognizing we better act on that, because we fail to act on that at our peril.
Yeah, we hear a lot of conversation about America being a, quote, maritime nation. And whenever I hear that, I think, maybe from the Navy perspective, but we haven't treated our maritime industry in that way. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think sometimes when people say America is a maritime nation, they think, we have coastlines, we have water coastlines. Right. But we need to make sure that we are a maritime nation in the sense that we can not only, and I think the very basic, necessary but not sufficient thing is to be able to control our own maritime borders and keep our domestic commerce moving safely, securely, efficiently within the United States. But we've also got to make sure that we are able to project American interests globally. And that's the piece where I feel like we've got a lot more catching up to do to ensure that, we can support our military in the event of conflict, and that we can make sure that we are not, sort of held hostage to supply chain issues beyond our control. And, we got a taste of that during the pandemic.
Absolutely, absolutely. You deal very closely with the Coast Guard and have for many years. A lot of different areas. Do you have a sense that the Coast Guard fully appreciates that we are in a new era also?
Last year I spoke to a gathering last fall to a gathering of Coast Guard senior leaders. So this is flag officers and senior executive service civilians. And the very first question that I got asked was, what changes in a contested environment? So I think they're thinking along those lines. I think we need to face the fact that we are in a contested environment. We're not in a kinetic environment, but we are absolutely in an environment, where the rules-based international order is being contested. It is being contested by China. It is being contested by Russia. It is being contested by others. And we need to be up to the task.
Yeah. You mentioned the ability to the importance of having a strong American maritime industry to project power. Let's take inventory, if you will, of what we have today from a shipping and shipbuilding perspective, an American shipbuilding perspective. What are we bringing to the fight?
Yeah, and I will start with, the place where I spend my day job, which is the domestic maritime industry. So AWO members specifically are domestic tugboat, towboat, and barge operators. That is the largest segment of the U.S. domestic fleet. And then wearing my American Maritime Partnership hat, that is a coalition that represents the U.S. domestic maritime industry writ large. So, we are bringing to the table a dedicated, technologically advanced, hardworking, efficient, safe, really, well-functioning domestic maritime industry as our foundation. And I think that is really important.
And that operates under American rules.
That operates under American rules. So, we've got the ability to move commerce in this country, whether that is up and down, the river system, which is the bloodstream of our country, whether it is along our coasts, whether it is to non-contiguous states and territories, using American-owned vessels, crewed by American mariners, as you say, all operated under the framework of U.S. law, built in U.S. shipyards. And they are doing an outstanding job. They are delivering excellent service. Safe just keeps getting safer, reliable. We saw that during the pandemic when we had international shipping rates going crazy, when we had long queues of vessels, off Southern California. Those were foreign flag vessels. We didn't have that in the domestic trade. We had steady as she goes, reliable service. We have innovation. When you look at the U.S. mainland to Puerto Rico trade, we have seen within a very short period of time, really the total transformation of the U.S. fleet that serves that market with world-class LNG-fueled vessels. So we start with a very good base in our domestic maritime industry. I don't think that's where the gap is, although, of course, we need to continually innovate. We need to continually attract people who want to work in this industry. Where we really have some ground to gain is in that fleet of vessels serving the international market.
Do you have any numbers around the domestic fleet that you'd like to share? Sure.
So, overall, there are about 40,000 vessels in the domestic Jones Act fleet. 33,000 barges, 5,000 towing vessels. We've got passenger vessels. We've got offshore supply vessels. We've got articulated tug barge units, tankers, self-propelled tankers, which are a critical part of the energy transportation system in the U.S. I think sometimes folks overlook when they say, wow, we've got work to do on the maritime industry. We've got 80 vessels operating under the U.S. flag, operating international trade under the U.S. flag. Right. But we've got this very robust domestic maritime industry.
So speaking of the international side of things,
Yeah.
and you mentioned that that's where the growth really needs to happen. Do you have a sense? Let me, before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about our allies. What we have in our domestic trade is what our what customers need in the domestic trade.
Yes.
I would categorize.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the domestic trade is really right-sized to serve demand in this country. It would, let me just put it out there, it would not be a good thing to just build up the number of vessels we have to serve the domestic maritime industry in the absence of demand. We've seen that happen. We know what happens when there are more vessels chasing the amount of cargo that's out there. Vessels get laid up, mariners get put out of work. So that's not what we need. What we need domestically is, the vessels and the mariners to serve the domestic maritime trade. Where we need a lot more is in the international trade.
And so what we have in the domestic market is sufficient for what we need, but it's not that impressive when you look at the international shipping market in terms of the numbers and so on.
Yeah, when I think of the U.S. maritime industry, I think what we've got domestically is necessary but not sufficient. If we didn't have it, we would be in a world of hurt. We would not have, homeland and economic security if we didn't have the ability to move cargo within U.S. borders, and if we didn't have some resilience there. We saw that after the Colonial Pipeline hack few years ago, where inland barges were able to, kind of come to the rescue of folks in the heartland who needed to be able to fuel up their cars because we had some resiliency. But it's in the international trade where we have a lot of work to do. And, that is largely because U.S. vessel owners have been operating on a wildly unlevel playing field. I mentioned at the outset, China gets it. They recognize that maritime is an instrument of national security and national power, and they have put their money where their mouth is, quite literally, and they have invested massively in building up a commercial fleet which can protect Chinese economic and security interests all over the globe. American vessel owners cannot compete with the full faith and credit of, the People's Republic of China.
Right, without lots more government support.
Without lots more investment.
Good. Some have said that we should be relying upon the substantial maritime capabilities of allies in the shipbuilding side and ship operations side from Korea, Japan, and from the EU in terms of ship operations and so on. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, so in a couple of ways. First is to say it is absolutely critical that we have and that we continue to strengthen our maritime alliances, and there is some wonderful opportunity, which I think is being, pursued with South Korea, with Japan, with the EU, with the Philippines. All of that is really good. Now, and what we're seeing, I think, is the opportunity to learn from, to employ best practices, et cetera. But let me be clear, we need to be able to build American ships in American shipyards. We do not want to be, in my view, outsourcing our defense industrial base to allies. Think about it. We want to be building ships in Korea, a stone's throw from China, instead of building them here. Absolutely not. I would also add, the massive investments that China has made in its own fleet. We have seen Chinese shipyards now just dwarfing the order books of their next closest competitors in South Korea and Japan. Shipbuilding in the EU, once powerhouse, has gone way down. Nobody can compete with that kind of state-subsidized juggernaut. That is not another government.
That's right. I think the figures for last year were Chinese shipyards won about 3/4 of the commercial ship orders for large commercial vessels, which leaves the rest of the world, including world-class shipyards in Korea and Japan, splitting less than 25%. So it is a real concern. Before we talk about how we go about growing the American international fleet and American shipbuilding capacity, Let's do a short detour down the Jones Act highway, if you will. Domestic transportation laws governing trucking, air transportation, and shipping, called the Jones Act, all restrict domestic transportation services to vehicles that use American workforce and obey American laws. Is that protectionism in your view?
That's common sense. I mean, that is just common sense. I don't know why we would expect the maritime industry to operate under, kind of a wholly different statutory and regulatory framework than any other industry in this country, which is to say employing American workers and complying with American law. I just, now more than ever, that doesn't make any sense, but I'm hard pressed to see when it ever would have.
Right. You mentioned the requirement that the ships be built in the United States, and that arguably is protectionist. Arguably, you could argue that both ways. It's certainly not, building a ship is certainly not the same as making plastic toys or patio furniture. But setting that aside, is that part of the Jones Act that we should consider changing?
It's a vital part of the Jones Act that we need to keep. I mean, you're exactly right. I'm not, too worried if we, are not the world leader in plastic toy manufacturing. Although I've purchased a few, my kids have won a few
Right.
plastic toys at Funland over the years. But it is critically important that we have the ability to build ships, to build vessels in this country. And she asked about the Jones Act. Let me give you another one of my pet peeves. People will sometimes say, well, wouldn't it be cheaper? If we didn't have the Jones Act? And my answer to that is, cheaper than what?
Right.
Cheaper than, employing undocumented workers, cheaper than not complying with, U.S. tax, environmental, other laws. Couldn't we hire people more cheaply if we didn't have to worry about those pesky Social Security and Medicare taxes? I mean, it's a ridiculous comparison, and I think it is a ridiculous comparison.
Well, some have argued that if our shipbuilders were just forced to compete with non-U.S. shipbuilders, particularly Chinese, that they would just tighten their belt and compete. How do you respond to that?
I think you gave the perfect answer to that question just a minute ago when you were talking about China last year having 75% of the world's order book for new vessels, and their world-class competitors, who have substantial, serious construction and some government support going for them too, in South Korea and Japan, really being dwarfed by that Chinese investment. Yeah. So, let's be clear. There is vigorous competition within the U.S. shipyard industry. And, we see that as vessel owners decide where they want to get their vessels built, where they want to get their vessels repaired. But to suggest that, somehow if we just kind of put the Jones Act aside, that U.S. shipyards would be able to compete with, this massive state investment, state subsidization on the part of China, I mean, it's just wrong. What would happen is we would decimate the U.S. shipbuilding industry and we wouldn't have it. And then we would have nothing to scale up when we need it.
Right. Interesting. Let me ask you now, how do we grow the American maritime industry? We have an industry now that is based upon demand for transportation services. Some of that demand is taken up by trucks and trains, and that mode of transportation may beat the maritime side of things in different markets. So we have what we have based upon on the domestic market, and we kind of recognize that that's not enough, as you say, to project power and go forward, which we need to do at this stage in history with the geopolitical challenge we have today. How do we grow the American maritime industry in the international markets? Yeah,
I think step one is recognizing and being intentional. We need to do something about it. The preamble to the Jones Act is necessary for the national defense. We need that sort of single-mindedness, that focus. We need to grow our U.S. flag, internationally trading maritime industry. That is a start. And I want to give, and then we need policies that support that goal. So I want to give a huge shout out to the bipartisan leadership that has produced the Ships for America Act. Senator Kelly, Senator Young, Congressman Kelly, Congressman Garamendi. That is a hugely important first step, I think, in laying out a comprehensive vision of how we can, really propel forward the maritime industry that we need to support it. It's a big, ambitious bill. It's got many components, and that is totally appropriate and necessary. And so I really applaud their leadership. I look forward to that legislation getting reintroduced soon in the 119th Congress. I think that they have done a huge service in kind of taking this maritime strategy conversation to a new level of seriousness and need for action.
It's interesting. I think that the progress that has been made as a result of all the work that went into putting that bill together, and it was a lot. It's 350 pages, and it really was started from scratch less than a year ago. And just having it out there, I think, is a really valuable step forward, and frankly, I think it needs to move very quickly to the next step and quickly to enactment. My perspective on it. Do the organizations that you represent have an official position? Because your organizations are not necessarily involved in international shipping per se. Do they nevertheless take a view on?
Yeah, so I think you're right that the AWO and AMP are both focused on domestic transportation. AMP is very narrowly focused on the Jones Act. Both organizations have said, we applaud the bipartisan leadership that recognizes this need that our country has and is, working to transform that vision into reality. So yes, we see this as a very good thing, and I think we also see it as a very good thing that the drafters of this legislation recognize the Jones Act as the foundation. We got to have this. Now, what else do we need to have?
Mm-hmm. The Jones Act is hardly mentioned in the bill. There are a couple of things.
And I think that is because, and this is, gratifying, wearing both my AWO and my AMP hats, because I think there is a recognition it works. We
Right.
absolutely need this. Now, what else do we need?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, good. In terms of specific parts of the bill, there's a number of really useful things that haven't been addressed or not addressed effectively in a while. Workforce development being one. Any comments on that aspect of it?
Workforce development is huge. I mean, it is just critically important. And, we see as the economy goes through cycles, times when there is a more or less acute need for people coming into the maritime industry to work on vessels or to work in shipyards. I think it's really important to kind of not get too lost in, sort of the noise of those acute situations. We've got a chronic need. We've got a long-term need to make sure that we have folks who know about this industry, who know about the opportunities that are here, and are incentivized to come work here. And there really are such an array of opportunities, from a float to working in a shipyard. We need to recognize that, maritime to many Americans is less visible than other modes. And, that's a little bit of a backhanded compliment. We do things well. And we're kind of not up in people's business until they don't have the service that they rely on. So we really do need, I think, a concentrated, concerted, kind of public-private partnership to make folks aware of all the career opportunities that are here.
Mm-hmm. Is the solution mostly about increasing competition in terms of growing the workforce?
So, I think it is. I think it is awareness. And then I think it is supporting the, multifaceted institutions that help to train and prepare people for maritime careers. And that really is diverse. Yes, it is the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. Yes, it is the state maritime academies. And, it is community colleges. It is local, training centers and institutions affiliated with high schools, community colleges around the country, because there's so many paths into this industry. Yeah, there's a huge path for college graduates, and there is also a huge path for hardworking folks, with a high school education or a GED who want to work hard and do something really, really meaningful. I think this is not going to solve the whole problem, but I got to put it out there because it's one of those things that drives me crazy. Right. We need to make sure that we are not doing anything that makes it harder for people to work in this industry and to stay in this industry. And right now, the mariner credentialing system that the U.S. Coast Guard oversees is plagued by antiquated technology. Mariners are national and homeland security assets. They deserve to be treated as such. At a minimum, they ought to be able to use a website that was developed sometime in the last century. So that is to me a piece of low-hanging fruit. Again, that's not, having a really modernized, well-functioning credentialing system is not going to solve the problem of, somebody in a rural southern Indiana who doesn't know anything about the maritime industry, but if they did, they would really find it cool. But it can be a big impediment, to somebody deciding whether to stay in the industry. And so we just need to fix that.
Mm-hmm. Now, one of the most important parts of the Ships for America Act is the Strategic Commercial Fleet Program, mm-hmm. which would actually grow the fleet from where it has been, 80 to 100, between 80 and 100 U.S. flagships in international trade to 250, with that being the goal, which is triple the size of the fleet that it has been at that level since the 1990s. For the most part. So it's a big, audacious goal, and to have those ships built in the United States shipyards is another element of the program that it is new and will kickstart shipbuilding in the United States, ultimately delivering 15 to 20 ships each year from U.S. shipbuilders. In terms of, and you can respond to any of that any way you'd like to, but certainly from a recruiting perspective, you're talking about recruiting into an industry that has growth, that has, that's a whole different kind of a...
Absolutely. And, speaking as Jennifer, who's made her career in the maritime industry, as opposed to Jennifer, who's running AWO or AMP, I think things like the Strategic Commercial Fleet, the expansion of the Tanker Security Program, the Cable Security Program, the Maritime Security Program, all of these things, go hand in hand. They are just important, parts of the answer to how do we grow the U.S. fleet internationally that we need to serve our needs. And you're right, if there's a workforce dimension, because there is opportunity that we need to make folks aware of. And then there is a vessel hardware side of it, like we just need more vessels under the US flag in order to do what we need to be able to do. Mm-hmm. And so I think the vision that this legislation lays out is yes, it is big and audacious, but it's very much needed.
Yeah, and the need to sort of grow our defense industrial base, our shipbuilding industrial base. There's all kinds of talk all the time around different approaches to Navy shipbuilding and making changes, and changes are constantly being made, and they're many times very useful, sometimes not so useful. But that's all within the sort of inward looking within the Navy, and all taxpayer financed. And the commercial shipbuilding side of things, which, and I'm testifying here, and I apologize for that, but it has been sort of forgotten and left for dead almost in the United States as far as public policy is concerned. And in contrast to what's happened in China, where they have China has made a strategic decision around building up its commercial shipbuilding capabilities, and they have succeeded in doing that, wildly
Yes.
succeeded in doing that, and now they're delivering 3 Chinese Navy ships for every one that's delivered to the U.S. Navy. So I apologize for testifying here, but
But I agree with you completely, though.
Yeah.
And, to be clear, there is a reason, that U.S. shipyards aren't doing that. And it is not because they can't. It is not because they don't have the technology or they don't have the expertise. They absolutely do. What they need is the order book, and they're not going to get that order book for vessels to operate in the international trade if they are, competing against this massive state-subsidized, I'm going to use the word again, juggernaut from China, which is, where some of these programs that the Ships for America talks about creating or expanding are so important. We're going to just get better and better the more of this we do. And we got a need to do a lot more than we have.
And there's an opportunity there also for technology.
Absolutely, absolutely. When I mentioned the really total transformation of the domestic fleet serving Puerto Rico as a great example of, the innovation, the investment, the commitment of U.S. vessel owners. So that is one of the youngest, most modern, environmentally sustainable fleets in the world. That was all done here. We can do that. We can build new types of vessels. We can get better at building existing types of vessels. Again, what we need is the demand signal and the support that allows that to actually come to fruition.
2 more questions. The first concerns the cost. There is a cost involved in, sort of saying we're going to build ships in the United States under American standards,
Yes.
using American labor in competition ultimately with ships built in China, with the Chinese cost paradigm and Chinese government support. So the advantage is massive. That under the Ships for America Act, that the goal is to have government support for closing that gap.
Yes. And so, let's be frank, and we are in an environment of cost cutting in Washington. So let's just confront that elephant in the room.
Right.
I would say, if we are looking at this only through the lens of cost and not through the lens of investment, then we're missing the boat. Yes, there are costs, but what are we going to get for those costs? And importantly, if we don't, take on these costs, what's the alternative? Is the alternative an investment in Navy assets that just massively dwarfs the relative bargain, that our military gets from being able to rely on a U.S. flag commercial fleet that also has military utility? I would argue that there is some real, value to the taxpayer in making some strategic investments to support the growth of a, much more substantial U.S. flag internationally trading fleet. It's going to help us protect and project U.S. interests and power around the globe. It's going to be a lot cheaper than relying only on, Navy and military assets to do that. And the alternative is really scary. Not doing anything at all is really unacceptable.
It's not acceptable. And just to sort of add to that, a big reason why it's so much cheaper is because a large part of the cost of the ships that we're talking about building and building in the United States and operating under U.S. flag and U.S. rules and U.S. expenses is covered in normal commercial contracts and in normal commercial trade.
Yes.
And so they've slotted into. So it's hard to imagine a more cost-effective way
Absolutely.
Of rebuilding our shipbuilding capacity in this space and our U.S. flag fleet and sea lift capabilities and so on. So I'm testifying again.
But I'm in complete agreement with you. I mean, it is, public-private partnership, which is the model that we need here. And we have seen from investment, from innovation, from just increased efficiency in the commercial market, all that, U.S. vessel owners, mariners, shipyards bring to the table. You asked earlier, what are we bringing to the table? A real track record of doing some amazing things, whether that's the development of containerization, whether that's, pioneering of alternative fuels, whether that is new vessel types, articulated tug barge units. So we can do it here. We need to do it here.
Mm-hmm. Last question. The Chips for America, or the CHIPS Act, not the Chips for America, CHIPS Act, Microchip Manufacturing Act, had the benefit of a lot of industry support and a very effective trade organization that was behind that and helped conduct studies that sort of demonstrated the need to do that. Is the U.S. maritime, it's a hard question, but is the U.S. maritime industry organized to provide that kind of support?
So, I hope that the answer is yes. It's organized differently in that it's not, there is one organization that speaks for the entire maritime industry. But what we do have is the opportunity and the reality, I think, of a multiplicity of voices saying, in this case, the same thing. We need to do this. We need this kind of investment. We can talk about the details of this provision or that provision, but vessel owners and shipyards and labor and, folks who are very differently situated within the maritime space, domestic and international, are saying, yeah, we need that and we want to work with you. In the same way, we're seeing bipartisan support for this. So I think we would be foolish not to take advantage of this moment in time. I mean, it really, I think, is an if not now, when. Is it hard? Yes. I mean, let me not in any way underestimate, the challenge of passing a massive piece of legislation like this, either whole cloth or breaking up pieces to, ride on other vehicles. But is it necessary? 100%. Can we do it? I really think we can. Good.
Well, I hope you're right. I certainly believe that with the support of you and others that you mentioned in the industry, there's a fighting chance that we can get this done. And I do believe it's really important to our country. So any closing thoughts from your perspective?
I really appreciate the opportunity to visit with you. It has been a joy for me to make my career in this industry. I have always felt like the work that our industry does is meaningful. It affects people's daily lives, even when they don't realize that it does. The lights go on, it's there. I feel like, again, this moment in time, as we confront really, a more dangerous geopolitical environment than at any time in my career, it just makes the industry that much more important. We want to keep this country safe, secure, prosperous, and a really revitalized U.S. maritime industry is fundamental to that.
Great. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak with you, and thank you for watching.